our students, first off, wanted to know what impact did your education have on your career choice? And if anyone wants to start it there.
My first semester in college was at University of Pacific in 1964, and I was the county youth chairman for the losing candidate in 1964, presidential candidate, Barry Goldwater. And about 6 weeks into that semester, I was confronted with a Western Civ professor who did 6 lectures claiming that Barry Goldwaterism was fascism. And I listened to about the first half of the first lecture and said, I don't agree with that. And so then spent the next 5 lectures debating this guy. When I eventually asked my wife, who's sitting there, my wife of 43 years, think of her patience, about out in my sophomore year, she went back to her dormitory and they said, don't go out with him, he debates professors. But what that undergraduate education taught me was that a single person can have a difference if they stand up and talk. So that was very important to me in my both choice of careers, where I spent 40 years advocating for various public policies, and also in sort of how I went through my undergraduate education.
Thank you, Jonathan.
I would answer that sometimes it has absolutely nothing to do with your future, at least on the surface of it. So I have a master's in tax law, which is to the career path I've taken about the most useless thing you could have, except everything you do. We just had this talk with our college-age, graduated college son about to start graduate school. Everything you do contributes to the knowledge base you need to be successful in whatever you're going to do in the future. And I mean that. It's you follow a path. There are some people who are lucky enough to know when they're born, this is what I'm going to do. They're the minority among us. Most people find a path through life that varies. If you're a leader in each of the elements of your life, you're going to rise to the top. And your body of experience, that which you have put together, helps you really manage through and rise to that level of expectation that you've either set for yourself or those around you are looking for you to have. So I'm a lawyer by training. I ended up in Africa bringing land rights. So there is a tie to law in that, but it's a minor tie. Most of it is a business orientation, and most of it has come from just being around people, hearing what they say, listening to these two gentlemen and the kind of advice they've given about what's important about leadership. Those qualities are really inherent in every leader that I've known who succeeds. You have to be willing to listen. You have to be ready to take a chance. You have to be ready to show people that you're willing to take that step. And all that confidence comes from the body of experience you have, both in your education and in the life experiences that you put together to get there. So don't ever think, this is the lecture I delivered to my 25-year-old about 2 weeks ago, don't think that you're narrowing your possibilities by taking a course today, because that will ultimately be grist for the mill in the ultimate embodiment of what you become. I'm still on that path. I'm 60 years old. I'm not sure what I'm going to be when I grow up. But there's an element to that that's in all of us. So I encourage you to just dive into whatever you're doing. The most important thing is have passion for what you're doing, really understand it, love it, and learn from it so you can carry that forward.
Thank you.
I think that was brilliant. I agree with everything you just said. And what I'd like to maybe do is twist it a little bit to really drive the point home that I think you were making. Whatever your degree is, use that to knock whatever job and career you have later, to knock the ball out of the park with that degree. whatever degree you have now, to do whatever job you have later to knock the ball out of the park. It's not going to matter. If you picked the right degree, it may make that job easier in some ways, but it's not the answer to doing the job well. It's certainly not the answer to being a leader. I'm an engineer by training. There is nothing about my job that requires engineering work, just nothing. But as an engineer, I learned how to do critical thinking. It's just something that not everybody learns in their degrees. So when I'm doing my counsel work, I apply the engineering frame of mind to add value to the equation. And as a leader, if you're an artist, but you're in a CEO's job, what did you learn as an art major that can bring value to providing the solutions in the job you're in? I'll say just one further point about that, because I see so many people get stuck this way. I'm sure you guys have seen this even more than me, maybe. Too many people, in my opinion, focus on getting the right degree at the consequence of getting in motion, being in action, picking a career that they're passionate about. Just do the degree. Don't worry about getting it perfect. Everything is going to work out afterwards. Nail it, do it well, do the homework, study it, love it, find your job, be passionate about it. It will work out. Yeah.
That's great advice. Thank you, Michael. Our students were speaking about that moment of chance, and they wanted to know if there was a particular opportunity or moment of chance that presented itself to any one of you that really changed the direction or course of your life as a leader.
I don't know that this is radical, but it's the one that comes to my mind, and it's I would say that my experience of what was described earlier happens every day in lots of ways. But the one that jumps to my mind now is I was telling you that about when I was about 30. I basically woke up one day, said I wanted to be in public service. I didn't know that meant running for office, and I was at church, I went to mass. Actually, I don't even remember why I was there, but I was in sort of central Los Angeles. And I had been looking for a way to be active in politics. And I thought, what better way to do it than volunteer at a campaign? And lo and behold, the pastor of the church I was at was introducing a woman who was running for Congress at the time. She was running in a contested race of 13 people. It was an open seat. Her name was, or is, and was at the time, Diane Watson. I ended up introducing myself to Diane at the end of Mass, and I then became a dedicated volunteer on her campaign. She ended up, like this all just happened. She won the race, became the congresswoman, and hired me, a guy from Hermosa Beach in central Los Angeles, in an almost entirely African-American district. And that basically was the time that I cut my teeth in politics, and it was thanks to that coincidence, that moment of chance, and that grateful, generous woman. Thank goodness. Thank you.
Mine came. I was at First American, and I got a phone call that President Clinton wanted to invite me to join the Clinton Global Initiative. I thought it was a mistake. Honestly, thought it was a mistake. So I didn't pay much attention to it. And I actually thought it was a joke from one of our managers. They were going to get even for the myriad of jokes I had played on them. And then I got a letter. And it turns out, much less about me and more about the subject, he had spent most of his adult life, he's a really bright guy. Whether you like his politics or not, he is an exceptionally bright guy. And he studies. And one of the things that he focused on when president and post-presidency was the fact that poverty seemed to stick around. There was no real end to it. He was frustrated because all the efforts and all the money and all the goodwill and all the attention it had received, it wasn't, there didn't seem to be a good solution. So he focused on the work by Hernando de Soto, an economist from Peru. And Hernando wrote a book, Mystery of Capital, back in the 80s.
Or The Other Path.
Yeah, The Other Path,
Yeah.
which is, and he had a theory that poverty alleviation really comes when you recognize formalized property rights. Anyway, Clinton subscribed to that theory, and he was looking for someone to carry it forward. And so he asked me to put a commitment together that would somehow move the ball down the court, move the ball down the field, to actually try and implement something that would affect land rights positively, to give the poor documentation, formalization of the land they have held, so they can begin to build on it, use it as an asset, etc. It actually forced my wife is a very understanding and complete partner. So we talked about it about 5 minutes, a life decision of this magnitude, moving from the president of a large company to actually taking early retirement and focusing on land rights as it affects the developing world. So Medeem was born, and it really changed our lives, and that was a moment of chance, I think.
Thank you.
In the early 1980s, insurance companies had the benefit of having a bunch of young MBAs who created something called cash flow underwriting. And what it basically said is that we can write at a substantial loss because we'll make it up on the interest that we earn for the money that we have for the time value of money. And that worked during the years of heavy inflation in the late 70s and early 80s, but it didn't work as well when inflation dropped down under 3%. So in the late 1980s, colleges and universities were facing a liability crisis. They couldn't get liability insurance. And so as president of the, or then as vice president of the association, I spent some time working on trying to figure out how to put together a pool for liability insurance. And we got some relatively good advice and some relatively bad advice. And then all of a sudden, the vice president of Santa Clara called me up and said, John, we'd like you to help form a liability company that higher education could do. And I was flattered, and I, took it and stuff like that, and became the founding chair of the company, and it's now the largest liability insurer for nonprofits in higher ed. And it was a mutual company, so it was owned by the policyholders. And about a year after I became chair, and this is the chance part of it, I was having dinner in Bermuda with the guy who had asked me to do it. And I said, Ralph, I'm still a little bit concerned about why you chose me. And he said, well, it's because of your dissertation. Now, my dissertation was called The Political and Economic Effects of Simplifying the California Personal Income Tax, not a real insurance-related topic. And Ralph looked at me and said, well, because I know about your doctoral work, and it was all in insurance. And until I was asked to be on that board of directors, I had only bought insurance but didn't know diddly squat about the activity. I'm now on an insurance company board of directors and have done some insurance consulting and stuff like that, all by somebody making a wrong assumption about me and jumping on it.
Thank you. So Michael touched on this question when he spoke about setting aside the ego. And our students were wondering, what personal sacrifice have you made in your role as a leader, if any?
I'll just start by saying dignity. You have to be willing to, this is sort of a light answer, but I think it actually has a deeper meaning. You have to be willing to laugh at yourself and put yourself in prime position to be laughed at. I look back on some of my most impactful talks. I would like to think that the detailed talks about, really sophisticated topics with our management made a difference. No. It was me wearing a red dress at a cross-selling that actually had the impact. It's stepping out and doing things that put you in the position of having the team realize that you're with them, and that you're willing to show that through even the most embarrassing of circumstances.
That's good. Thank you.
I guess one of the things that I've enjoyed since I left the association is that point of personal sacrifice that I no longer have to do. For the 25 or 30 years that I worked for the last 25 or 30 years that I worked for the association, I spent so much time on airplanes that I had a pilot actually on United come to me, not once but several times, saying, "You fly more than I do." And that sacrifice took time. I recognized one of the things, coming back to your idea about eco, I recognized fairly early that getting a lot of things done was meeting people on their place, not on mine. So I spent a lot of time going to various places in this country and outside of this country, sitting down with people. My sort of favorite experience when we were doing United Educators, I think my daughter was playing soccer at the time. I had a board meeting in Bermuda on a Friday, came back for a Saturday, and then had a speech in Florida on a Sunday, and did that. And if you think I'm psychologically unbalanced, you're correct.
I guess I'll just I'll offer maybe a practical one or a pedestrian one. Maybe is the way it's better to describe it. I have. Would you phrase the question one more time so I can just?
Yep. Have you encountered any personal sacrifice in your leadership goal, and if so, what was that?
Yeah, I think that I had always envisioned that when I did things smartly, fairly, to the best of my ability, that everybody would then like me, right? Sort of like I talked about that before. And what I've actually had to sacrifice is that fantasy, and in really practical terms is I've lost friends through decisions I've made. And I've lost friends over decisions I've made or things that I've pursued. I've lost friends for both the reasons that I did them and for reasons that they understood that I did them, even though I didn't do them for those reasons. And that latter is probably the hardest thing. The thing I've had to sacrifice most is being right about that. Because it's pretty hard. It'd be fine for you to not like me because you don't like guys with blonde hair. But if you didn't like me because I had red hair, that's a really strange relationship to have with somebody. And obviously I'm using a ridiculously simple analogy to make the point, but it's been, that has been something I've struggled with the most, and I've had to sacrifice being right about what that person should know about what I did and what I didn't do. So that's it.
Thank you. That sort of leads us into the student's next question, which was, have you ever had to sacrifice your personal morals or values in your role as a leader?
Yes and no. I'll say it this way. I absolutely have never, to the best of my ability, to the best of my knowledge, sacrificed a value, a moral that is critically important to me. What I have done, and this is why I say yes and no, is when you're in a position of being the CEO, of the decision maker, you start very quickly realize that there are some things that are more important than others. And so there are a value I just described in the last question. It was valuable to me historically to have all my friends continue to like me and in fact like me more. That was valuable. But what I've realized is that's a value that has far less merit to it than me improving the quality of life for the 20,000 residents of Hermosa. For me to do things that have more significance to myself, my role, my community. And so what I've really done is actually I've prioritized. I really kind of almost have a mental list of here's what matters most to me that I'm not going to budge. Here's things that are important I can move on. And then there's just things that are sort of wishes.
Thank you.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think you have to have a core set of values. And all of us, when we live our daily lives, it's no different in a company, in an organization than what you do for yourself. You have core values, and you try and hold on to those for dear life. It is what grounds you. You make little compromises on the fringes because we all have to get along. Life isn't perfect. There are decisions to be made, and many of the decisions don't have a right and wrong answer. So you've got to, particularly as you get into enterprise, it affects lives, and so you have to make decisions. You try and hold firm on the core values, and then you try and make sure that when you're making decisions that take you from them, they're justifiable, balanced, and that you can sleep at night making those decisions. So, in larger companies, a lot of people are making decisions for you. And part of the challenge of leadership is setting a tone and objectives that everyone can guide themselves in the individual decisions they're making. As I said before, most of what happened that was good in the company was because of the 35,000 people making good decisions. And they made those because they had their own inner sense of what was right and important. But also, I would like to think we had a little bit of role in that by setting some guidelines that had them following a path that was good for the company as well and the right path to take. So you try and avoid it, but life is going to confront you with opportunities to challenge yourself to make sure that you can stay with those core principles, not give them up, but succeed as well.
Thank you.
C.S. Lewis talks about compromising your values and the danger of making small compromises because they grow into larger ones. I think I can honestly say that in all the time that I worked in political life, I never had to make a decision where I had a core value. But I think what every person who works in political life has to figure out, and I think in business also, is what are your core values? There are things that are important to me that are absolutely important. Personal integrity is a huge one for me. And if I get nailed by somebody in their personal integrity, I'm done. Fool me once, fool me twice, you don't. But then there are things that are important to me because I've thought about them, but are they core values? And I think one of the hardest things for me over the last, certainly over the last 20 years, is trying to figure out what your core values are and understanding why they're core values.
So let's lighten things up a little bit. Our students wanted to know if you utilize social media tools and how.
I do. I'm not very good at it, but I use Facebook and Twitter and Instagram. Instagram's how I share family photos with family members generally. And Facebook I actually use quite a bit related to my city council role. I find it to be a really neat way for people to actually connect with me. And so I end up doing a lot of either Q&A with folks or just almost it becomes my office hours, if you will, on the city council where I'm accessible to people. They can see me, they can follow me, they can ask questions. Trying to always be better because it's a totally appealing field to me, but also a little shy about it.
Thank you.
No, and I wish I did, but I don't. For what we do, it's less important, and it's actually a bit of a distraction. If you're in public life, I think it is an invaluable tool to communicate with your constituents, get feedback. It's a remarkable thing. So I'm in awe of it. I'm not a practitioner, probably because, again, of age and experience. I haven't jumped to it. In our business environment, the less said, the better for our company. We're trying to construct an organization that has size and Believe it or not, even though we're in the social impact space trying to do good, competition is a problem for us. We don't want to engender competition. So we're trying to stay below the radar until we have sufficient size to achieve our objective, which is to be self-sustaining, to be able to produce our product, have our clients who are living below the poverty line be able to purchase it, so making it affordable for them, but taking enough market so that we can keep that price sustainable, affordable. And to do that, we have to sort of be under the radar. So there's a business reason for doing it as well.
Thank you.
I carry 2 phones, an iPad, and a laptop. And I answer like he does. I'm still not convinced that Facebook and Twitter are adequate to communication in the kind of communication that I think is important. Somebody, I've forgotten who I just read, said Facebook looks like an awful lot of a waste of time. I think we're eventually going to figure out how to use the medium. There's a really good book on it by a professor at Stanford Business School named Jennifer Acker called The Dragonfly Effect. And there are a lot of people that are trying to think about it. But I look at it and I really don't care that my daughter-in-law had pancakes for breakfast.
I should also say that the topic came up at dinner about electronic communication. So I'm going to broaden the question to be a little bit about email as well. And though we have all risen to a level of communication electronically that is extremely sophisticated and efficient, I wanted to call to everyone's attention that human communication is still the best way to communicate if you have something serious to talk about. So at First American, for instance, I had a rule. It was too easy to fire off emails. I would have disputes between individuals or departments because they could fire off an email and run for cover. They never had to actually deal with it. So the rule was if you had anything negative to say, you had to call the person. If you had positive stuff, write to your heart's content. Send them an email. Send them a long email. But if you have something that you want to question or something you want to criticize, pick up the phone. And it actually occurred just recently in a transaction. Lauren and I were working with an organization. We were trying to help them with a transaction. And the agent who was representing them wanted to send an email to move the transaction ahead. And I said, just don't do that. Go meet the other side. Go sit down with them and meet them. And she's a product of the email generation. She fought me. She was like, that's a waste of time. It's going to take me 2 hours to drive there. I could be doing, they're used to it. They're going to be happy getting the email. Well, she went to the meeting, and she called me after the meeting. She goes, I'm never sending another email for a meeting like that again. I can't believe they agreed. And there is. We all have these subtle cues. Lauren's reading a book. We've just seen a show about all the subtle things that go into communication, things we're not even aware of. Nanoseconds before you're aware of it consciously, body signals and chemistry and signs have been given off that affect the way you react to the people you're reacting to. So take advantage of that. Don't lose it. Use email and the social media. My advice would be, I sound like the old guy lecturing here, but my advice would be use the media to your advantage, but don't let it supplant the ability and the need to be face-to-face when it comes to important things.
Thank you. Who is a leader that has inspired you and why?
I have been on I've created a hobby for myself of reading presidential biographies as sequentially as a way to learn American history. And as a way to learn about some pretty fascinating people. And I am to our 6th president now. I've also read our more recent ones, Bush, Clinton, and Obama. But I've found in reading these that I have become fascinated with John Adams, our 2nd president. And he's sort of overshadowed by George Washington, the stature of the leadership, and Thomas Jefferson, the sort of the brilliant creator of so many of the documents and thoughts that we live and breathe today as Americans. And in their shadow is in my non-expert historian experience, understanding, is this third individual that helped drive the revolution home. And what I like about him and I admire about him, is his unwavering passion and commitment to articulating his or their vision for America. And I've totally, I'm sure a studied historian could debate this, but in lay terms, Washington was the leader, Jefferson was the thinker, and Adams was the guy who sold it. And what's neat about Adams is that he, as many of them did, they wrote their communications. He was known to be quite vain and actually saved as much of his written correspondence as was possible. And so there are mountains of written correspondence between him and other leaders, global leaders, national leaders, and he and his wife, thousands of letters. And in some of these biographies, you really get a sense of how much pain he went through to stand up, to be one of the people that put their life on the line, and how much thought he and all the others put into getting this right. The thing that's right that we all think is so obviously right because we've known it all our lives, but they were thinking this through, and he was the one trying to convince people in verbal form. And I've really, sort of touching on the value of communication face-to-face, I mean, so critical. And here was a guy who, I don't know if he mastered it or not, but it certainly was something he was trying to master. And I find myself fascinated with who he was and how he did that.
Thank you.
I've got two sort of odd examples. I would go to the fourth president for his intellectual leadership. The U.S. Constitution was basically constructed by James Madison. I look at, he was a horrible president, okay? I mean, I don't know how you're reading of him, but he was not a very good president, but he drove the Constitutional Convention, and in his dotage, he lived until 1836, he established a correspondence that is rich in thinking about the constitutional system. So he was an intellectual leader for a country that was intellectually developed, okay? And then the other leader that fascinated me, my wife and I had the opportunity to meet Desmond Tutu. And Desmond Tutu conveyed a sense of optimism, of opportunity, of reconciliation that exuded the minute that we shook hands with him, the minute that we saw him, the chance that we had to interact with him. And he led, in essence, by charisma, but he leads with both moral example and sort of energy that is, if you could bottle it, you could sell it easily. And just a fascinating person and a really delightful person to talk to.
I tend to look at things much more superficially. I'm listening to these guys, and they've thought about this. Mine tend to be compartmentalized and more current leaders. So I look in the religious sphere. It's a rabbi who's a friend of ours, and I think he's a particularly insightful guy, and so I draw from him. On the political front, we too have had the chance to meet Desmond Tutu. That is a great choice. I would also nominate Bill Clinton. Again, current, just because of his ability to synthesize an inordinate amount of information in a very complex world and somehow be able to put those pieces together. I learn when I'm in his company and read from that. So I don't mean to demean at all the historical leaders. In fact, I'm just not smart enough to have studied them as these gentlemen have and have an opinion on them.
How does one know when your persistence has evolved to your stubbornness?
So the best example I can give you of persistence that succeeded was an initiative I launched to bundle our products and services at First American. we had a siloed business. We had 23 separate businesses, each with their own sales organization, each with their own product mix, each selling to the same customer. And I came in as president. I thought, well, we only had about 5 when I came in. But by the time I was midterm, it was about 23. And I kept thinking, this is just ridiculous. It's so inefficient. And we could wipe out the competition if we put those products together. Because though every one of those businesses had a competitor, collectively, there was no competitor who could offer all of those products. So if we could put them together, if we could get the companies to cooperate with each other, to actually coordinate the delivery, we could be very efficient. Our cost would come down. It would put pressure on the competition. All would be well. And so I persisted. Year 1, it was an idea, a little bit of feedback, some general, consensus. Okay, Craig's got an idea. That's a good one. And they started to adopt it. But then they started to hit the institutional resistance that comes whenever you're fighting something that's been in place a long time. So to make a very long story short, I'll just say that it took 5 years. 5 years. So that's where the persistence comes in. And it took convincing our clients, our customers, as well as our own operators. We were selling both sides, inside and outside, to get that across. And that was an example of where persistence paid off. Where I pushed on certain elements of that included adopting a single sales force, that became stubbornness. It became clear that it was not going to work, not just because of their egos, but because each sales organization had so much detail about their product that we couldn't put them together. We had to integrate them into a common sales force with elements from every company. And I persisted. I persisted, and finally the marketplace and my own operators were very clear in telling me I was stubborn. And so I quietly withdrew, said, that's okay, we'll have a sales force made up of all of you, but we'll combine our products, we'll distribute them together, and we'll manufacture them together. So it was pushing that extra 10 yards that got me to stubbornness.
I'd say that so far it occurs like it's a lifelong learning lesson, and that the more I end up getting it wrong, the more in the future I'll sense it in time to get it right. Right? Like having actually done the damage by being too stubborn on something means next time I'll pick up on the cues that I overlooked the last time around. And one of those cues for me actually is increasingly my internal body temperature, meaning I can tell. Don't misinterpret me. I still am stubborn and get it wrong, but I am increasingly able to tell when I'm unwilling to budge on something, and partly how I feel it. Maybe it's my Mediterranean nature. I don't know, but I feel my heartbeat rising. I feel my body temperature going up, almost like I'm about to get in, for me anyway, I'm about to get in an argument. Right? I'm holding on so darn tight to the idea. Everything's constricted. Body is like girded. And I watch for that. That's a red flag. It doesn't mean that I'm being stubborn, but it is an early sign for me that I'm going overboard. One of the signs, the other signs, and this is, you can never tell in advance if this is right, but the people that you expect to agree with you start falling off. Either their participation falls off, or they bail, or they critique it. It doesn't always mean, I don't experience that it always means that I'm now becoming stubborn. But that's one sign to kind of course correct and check in. Am I being stubborn, or am I committed to a value or a vision that is just and sturdy? So for me, it's internal temperature. And maybe just to say the other side, when I'm not being stubborn about it, about an idea or a concept, I'm willing to be convinced that there's a better solution. There's a better answer. It's when I stop being open to a better answer and I can feel it inside that that's probably when I'm stubborn. that's when I'm hooked on my version of the answer.
By the way, none of us are ever stubborn at home.
That's true, absolutely. I'm going to disprove that for a minute. We had 2 kids. One who was compulsive about grades and activities and stuff like that, and our younger child, my son, was put on this earth to give me gray hair. As you guys have heard, intellectual activity excites me, gets me going every day and stuff like that. Our son, that's not a high priority with him. And I spent the first 18 years of living with this kid saying, we're going to push you into this direction. And he would say very politely, hell no. When I finally figured that out and started to watch the qualities that this kid has, he's now 30, of loyalty, of caring about family. He's now got 3 kids of his own. And the greatest delight of the stubbornness versus persistence thing, about once a month he'll call my wife or I and talk about one of his 3 kids and saying, you know, Mason or Nicholas or Alexandria are doing X. And we simply say in the most persistent way we can, payback.